Welcome to Immunity Group Australia's podcast. Today we are talking with Mr. Simon de Roza, neurodivergent educator from the Northern Beaches in Sydney. Hello, Simon.
Hi there, how are you?
Amazing to be here with you today.
Oh, it's lovely to be here, and what a great day it is. It's beautiful, sun's shining, birds are singing. It's a good day to be alive.
Please tell me, from your 35 years of experience being a neurodivergent educator, what kind of challenges do families come to see you about most?
Well, there's a lot of co-occurring conditions with ADHD and autism, and there's food sensitivities as well as sensory sensitivities. But I think the common thread is anxiety and helping kids and parents understand the role of anxiety, because anxiety has actually kept us alive. It's a survival technique which has helped us. So I tend to explain the neurology of anxiety and worries, and then explain to them how to switch that off, because there's a time when anxiety is actually handy. It switches you on to survive difficulties in life, but it doesn't switch off very well, and we have to reassure it, and our brain, that is, that we are safe and it is okay. That thought did serve us, but perhaps it's not serving us as it once did.
How does anxiety present itself through different stages of development?
Wow, great question, and perhaps I wish you'd asked me that so I could have done some research on it. Oh, look, a butterfly. So look, it just so different. Just so different. And I think the younger children perhaps haven't internalised or matched the feeling with the word that we might use. So often with particularly young children, anxiety can be expressed through play and through artwork and perhaps even through music. So they're usually really good indicators that something's up. People also look at behaviour as an expression of that anxiety, and it's not worry, and it's not always being shy, but sometimes anxiety can turn up in dominating play, where in fact they're perhaps so worried that something unpredictable might happen that they try and control the situation as much as possible. Sometimes it can look as really defiant behaviour, or even arrogant behaviour in slightly older kids too. But in fact, it's all about control. You see, safety is a bit like beauty. It's in the eye of the beholder. And you might think the situation's safe, but if a child doesn't feel it's safe, and that basic need, old mate Maslow, if the child doesn't feel safe and secure, then they really can't focus on just about anything else. In fact, they really can't develop. So one of the early signs is a delayed milestone of some sort, because the kids are so anxious. So older kids, well, it tends to happen around growth spurts. It can be like dominating aggressive behaviour. It can be withdrawn. Usually what we find is that with neurodivergent people is that if the girls have got anxiety, they are very good at masking and covering it up, because they don't want to be different from anybody else, because that's actually stressful. That's it's a survival technique, that there's a safety in numbers. So it can be very much internalised, and kids start saying things like, well, maybe I'm just not smart enough, or maybe I'm not good enough, and we start to see the emergence of the inner critic, perhaps by this time of 7 or 8, and that inner critic drives them to conform with whatever they think is neurotypically normal, what's being expected.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so sometimes you can start seeing the emergence of people pleasers, and certainly I believe one of my daughters was that way. She just was a beautiful daydreamer with lovely creative ideas, but she was very anxious about pleasing people, and that can lead to something else when it comes to anxiety. So after perhaps the kind of senior primary, we tend to get to high school and parents become less important and the tribe becomes more important and being part of that tribe. And I tell you what, I don't know how kids do it now. Navigating high school now is just so much more complicated than we ever thought it was. And a lot of the anxiety about staying in the group or around the WhatsApp group and reading the 180 messages, etc., is because they don't want to be a target. It's not because they want to, it's just trying to make sure they're not targeted by things, and that's completely exhausting.
And being a food allergy child, especially a teenager, we find in statistical information that the compliance factor is the lowest amongst teenagers. They are at highest risk of actually reacting to foods, not just because they want to react, obviously they experiment sometimes with foods, but then perhaps that conformity, trying to not be different, also would make some of them take that risk, which normally they would never even consider taking.
Yeah, look, I didn't know that, but that makes absolute sense. You see, humans are meant to survive, and that's why I explain to kids neurology of worry and anxiety, that it exactly helped us survive and why we're here. And the brain's got, I think, 3 rules. One, to keep everything the same and safe. And I explain to this like kids. You see, your brain thinks, and thought a long time ago, that if it's safe and everything's the same, that's because everything you're doing is correct. Everything's right. So if you haven't been eaten by a saber-toothed tiger, don't do anything that a saber-toothed tiger is going to do to eat you. I know, it sounds silly, but just bear with me. And then the second rule of the brain is to keep fed and rested, just in case a saber-toothed tiger comes along. Because everything you're doing is to be sure that you don't get eaten. So if you've got a full belly and you're nice rested, you've got plenty of energy to get away from the saber-toothed tiger. And the third rule of the brain, a bit like Asimov's 3 robotic rules, the third rule is to be part of a tribe, part of a group. Now, I think anxiety flows through these rules. And if the brain thinks there's a threat, well, a threat, because saber-toothed tigers are dead, that's what I tend to explain to kids, but our brain hasn't evolved and it sees threats in lots of different ways. So if the brain sees this threat to keeping everything self and the same, it will react. And if you get enough cortisol being produced in the brain, and then that stress builds, the kids that I particularly work with lose access to the frontal cortex, which is more or less the decision-making part of the brain, and we start to react from like the amygdala, and survival kicks in that we fight, flee or freeze. I like to add fib in there. I think that comes from my education.
What's a fib?
Fib. Well, when you ask kids what happened, often kids actually don't know, because when you get heightened like that and you start to have a meltdown, your brain doesn't store memories the same way. It doesn't use short-term memory. And usually ADHDers have very big problems with short-term memories, fine with long-term memories. But I don't know how many kids I've accidentally thought were lying or just not telling me the truth. And I've said, hey, what's going on? What'd you do that for? And they go, I don't know. Actually, sometimes they really don't know. And then they'll just come up with something in an attempt to get out of that trouble that they're in. But for all that cortisol and the adrenaline to drain out of the body takes about 15 to 20 minutes. So if there is a situation where there's been an explosion or something like that, it's really not worth talking to a kid, because they won't have access to the frontal cortex and the rational part of the brain for about 20 minutes.
Would we say that would be the same for anaphylaxis, being such a massive life-changing moment when a child perhaps doesn't remember what they consumed or how did it happen? Would that sort of experience relate to that situation as well?
I think worry and anxiety is the same. Whatever the trigger is, you get the same similar response. So it completely and utterly makes sense. And teenagers too, they're not just wanting to be part of a group, they actually feel threatened. So I can imagine they want to be the same, so they probably downplay, not participate, not tell other people, because that drive is not just a peer pressure group thing, it's an instinctual thing to stay alive. I think our society since COVID has been much more anxious, so our worry cups are really full just to start with. It doesn't take too much to overfill them now, or you know, you, for our brains to be triggered. You know, you see all those videos on road rage and people losing it, and etc. I won't say Karens, but and they love kind of exploiting those poor people who have lost access to their rational brains. But the thing that our brain hasn't done is worked out how to turn off our worry.
What are some of the strategies that you suggest? So let's say both parents of teenagers, if we're talking about teenagers, and teenagers themselves, how to calm down that anxiety? Is there like a magic bullet solution, or what should they do first, if not one thing?
You know, I play Jenga a lot with kids, and I think any games are good because in Jenga I can actually point out that moment when they're making a choice, where they stop and make a choice. And when they change their mind to pick out one block instead of another, that's when you can teach the teachable mind, go, you see what you did just then? You stopped and you made a different choice. You went somewhere else. That's what we want to do more of when it comes to your thoughts. See, kids sometimes just hear a voice, and because they hear and they think that's correct, whatever's in their head. They don't realise that sometimes what we say to ourselves is not always correct. It's not always fact. But it's that point where you go, where you're making a choice, where you need to stop and think. I often play tricks on kids where I tell them that their shoelace is undone, or there's, gullibles out the window. I make them look, and they get cranky with me, and I like it because it's a dad joke thing. But what I explain to them is that they're polite, nice kids, so they go and have a look. But they know now that they're going to be tricked by me. So what they're actually doing is creating a very, very small new neural pathway. And I tell them, hey, you're building a new brain. Your brain, you're going to wake up tomorrow and one side of your head's going to be heavier because you're actually changing the size of your brain just because you're thinking about it.
What about parents in that situation? Because are we just is it possible to make those new neuron connections by anxious parents who overthink about their children in this context of food allergies, but also ADHD and other conditions?
Oh, look, absolutely. I mean, the parents and the parent who is spending more time with the child, their survival instinct really takes place and takes precedent over everything. So often they will be in a fight, flight, freeze mode all the time, protecting their child. I think just like the child, it's up to the parents to go, is this serving me now? Is this actually helping? Especially as the kids are recovering. And unfortunately, kids read our body language.
Tell us more about that.
Well,
what can they read from us that we want to hide? Everything?
When I was working in Indigenous communities, the Indigenous kids would know 2 minutes before I walked in the classroom how I was feeling, and then would respond. They're very, very sensitive to picking up body language and how you use it. Kids have learned how to read, write, walk, get away with things. They've learnt you as a parent too, and they know how to set you off and perhaps even try and manipulate you to get their way, not because they're nasty or mean, but that's just because kids do. But they can read your body language, and if they see you nervous, that's going to make them nervous. And if they can't see the danger, if they can't see the saber-tooth tiger, then they're not going to relax. You might see okay, this situation's actually okay, but you've switched on your kid to worry, and you haven't switched them off, just through your body language and your tone of voice. But I understand it as a parent, going to school, going to doctors, just living of life, and sometimes the lack of understanding and the amount of judgment that is thrown your way, why you're in that state. It's a completely normal response. But I suppose after a time, it doesn't serve you. and perhaps it's like a victim of abuse or a trauma survivor. Is that really serving you now? It did serve us. Is it now?
So changing the behaviour by the parents is essential, and self-reflection by the primary caregiver.
Well, look, the modelling is such a powerful tool, especially with the younger children, to go, perhaps even, it's called metacognition, it's thinking about thinking, and it's one of the areas which is particularly weak in the frontal cortex, but it's such a wonderful, powerful tool. So you can just, especially when they're trapped in a car, you can go, that person didn't put a blinker on, you go, you know what, actually, it's probably not that important, is it? I'm just going to take a breath and just move on.
So not to pick on everything.
That's just an example. So you're actually modelling to kids the kind of thinking that you want them to do. They might be getting worried, and you've got to be the calm, the reassuring person. Because we know from Maslow's hierarchy of needs that unless they're physiological, unless they're feeling safe, and that's going to come from their parents, they're not going to be able to learn socially, academically. So parents will help create that atmosphere by truly believing in it themselves. So if they're going to truly believe in it, maybe they need to do some work on themselves through counselling or psychologists, or just talking, if they're lucky enough to have a partner, about changes and perhaps the impact that it's had. But I think most of all, just be kind to yourself. What you did for your child by being hypervigilant, it's perfect. It was great. It was needed. But is it serving you now?
So that's pretty much the talk we had before our interview about rewiring the brain by both the parents and the children. After undergoing oral immunotherapy, when some kids reach full food freedom, it is not an easy process then to rewire a person's brain. What does your sort of experience tell you about that?
Well, it's a bit like those teenagers and young kids we were talking about. You need to stop and be aware of your thinking. And with younger kids, we use that for games. I think for us, it's stopping and hearing that inner critic and just going, oh, is that a healthy way? Is there a healthier way of thinking about this? Is that really going to happen? That's the point, the work the parents need to do on themselves. And I think once they're feeling more comfortable with it, becoming more aware, and sometimes it just takes one conversation and a parent can change their whole life and their whole outlook. Sometimes it might be more gradual, depending on, let's face it, I think some of the things that these parents have gone through are traumatic, and it's going to take a lot of work to get through. So there's no right way, there's no right timing. It's all about in your time and in your way. But you can create those new neural pathways. So the brain doesn't know the difference between real and imaginary. So if you can meditate on it, if you can visualise yourself responding well in a difficult situation, in a normal, everyday situation, if you see yourself being the calm, alert person that they need to be, then the brain is more likely to follow that path. So you create new neural pathways. But the best thing about the brain that people forget is that it's fantastic at learning. It's also fantastic, and I'd say equally as good at forgetting. So, but that's a whole new podcast. I think but the forgetting thing can be healthy, but it also means if we're not thinking that particular way, it loses its integrity. To me, the neurons are a bit like walking across a dewy grass, and you look back and you can see the marks that you've left, or perhaps in the sand. If you walk backwards and forwards, it becomes a pathway. And it's basically a stronger neural connection. But if you stop walking that path and walk another path, it's eventually just going to disappear. And that's exactly what happens. So
unlearning and relearning, perhaps.
Yeah. Catch yourself thinking and go, you know what, that was fine, but now we're in this place and we can do better.
When it comes to small children and those sensory issues, which you mentioned at the beginning, a lot of food allergy children have sensory difficulties because from the early age, many of them are told, don't touch this surface is contaminated, be careful which child touches you. So it becomes, for many kids, a sensory problem. What would be your advice to those parents, perhaps, of children who have sensory issues due to food allergies, perhaps?
Well, I'd be saying, first of all, be kind to yourself. Okay, don't blame yourself. What you did was perfectly normal human response. And I think we're saying to people, you've taught that to kids, but it's like having too many tabs open on your computer. And ADHD is like me too. We'll not only just have too many tabs open, but we'll have 3 windows with 24 tabs on each one. And it's not until everything starts to slow down do we actually start closing some of those tabs. But the brain won't do it. The kids' brains won't do it themselves. So just as much as you did say, watch out for this situation or watch this, you need to unswitch that and say, you know what, we don't need to worry about that piece anymore. Or we're doing this now, so we don't have to worry about that. You need to physically close off those tabs in the kid's brain, because otherwise, just like the CPU, will be overloaded and they'll have no capacity for anything new. So it's a bit like holding your child's hand when you cross the road, and you can perceive the dangers they can't, and you need to help them perceive the change in their environment and articulate it, because sometimes we take for granted that we're food free now. That doesn't actually mean the kid knows the impact of that statement.
Excellent advice. We also spoke about the Australian education system and how much lack of awareness there is about certain neurodivergent conditions generally, even in the educational system level. Food allergies are not dissimilar in that regard. A lot of children with food allergies are bullied, and then they become young adults, then they hide their condition and try not to be different, like you said.
Yeah.
When it comes to bullying, and the statistics are quite scary, 40 to 60% of food allergy children are bullied at primary school level.
Yeah.
We don't actually have the right statistics for afterwards. What would you say to those families?
Well, look, I've done a lot of work with schools and advocacy, and I've been a teacher for many years, and many of my friends are teachers as well. And it wasn't until I left education that I started to really learn and understand what was going on. I thought I had the best knowledge working part of education. They told me I had the best knowledge, but I did not, and I had to learn. And most of the teachers, principals, assistant principals out there think they have the bee's knees of knowledge. They believe they have the cutting edge. And there's also this almost pathological need for teachers to be correct, because they're bashed up by the media all the time for making mistakes. So they haven't got the right information, so they double down and stick to it as best they can, because they really actually at their heart want you to feel that they're good enough and that their child is actually safe. So there's a whole lot of complex here. Teachers are also asked to do so much and so many different things. The accountability is just crazy at the moment. And food allergies is just one thing on the entire plate of things to do. And there is that, that attitude of, oh, yeah, another person allergic to nuts. Yeah, you're one of them. And
which is horrible for food allergy parents,
wow.
But for the teachers
and the kids, and then a kind of negative kind of culture around that, or separating kids from the rest of everybody else. Now, we all know that inclusion is the goal. We all know the power of inclusion, but they're still segregating. Really, and that happens to neurodiverse kids, sensory kids. That, we'll try and accept you, but just sit over there, rather than truly putting the effort in to truly integrate these kids so they can form those good relationships and bonds. Because we know that kids who are by themselves become targets of bullies. And we're separating them, and we might as well just put a target on them for bullies.
That's a very good point, actually, yeah.
Yeah.
And in terms of your Indigenous teaching experience, that was quite an interesting, point which you raised about perceptions by Indigenous students of the educators. What are some of your best sort of success stories in working with Indigenous population?
Well, I think in the first week of going out there, I worked out in Wilcannia a million years ago. They didn't like me, they didn't like what I had to teach, they didn't like being at school. And I couldn't change that. So I had to be the change. I had to be the responsible adult and go to where they wanted to go. And I had to let go of so many expectations. So I think that was the best grounding for me as a teacher, full stop. Because, you know, sometimes these kids who are worried or anxious can't change. So we have to be the responsible adult and do the change for them. So, I've had some really interesting interactions. I actually got married out in Canada, and we had some friends join us, and they did this fertility dance, and it worked because I've got 4 kids, and but I suppose the most beautiful one is that my daughter was the only white kid at this Aboriginal preschool, and her teddy bear, which she still owns, and she's 34 now, was stolen by one of the other kids. And it was at that point that the aunties realised that she had no kin, she had no links to the rest of the community, and if she was going to be here, she needed to be part of... People needed to know where she was sitting in terms of all those families. So she was adopted to a skin, as they called it, and we had no problems with the teddy bear. In fact, the teddy bear was actually returned because all of a sudden, because of association, my then wife and I became uncles and aunties. And
so the belonging, the themes of belonging and integration.
The thing which is really very different, and I think a lot of people have problems with Indigenous people, is that there's not just one parent or 2 parents in an Indigenous culture. There's a number. And I think that's a beautiful thing because you're bringing so much more experience or so many more ways of interpreting the world to support and help this kid. So, that was a beautiful thing to be accepted and have my daughter accepted that way.
That's honestly a great story for our food allergy community, to be accepted, to be accepted as you are.
So that's true integration, that's true inclusion, and I think they had it right, my goodness, 30 years ago.
Tell me about your Facebook group. You have an amazing educating Australians and others who are members of your group on so many levels. How did you establish this group, and can you tell us the name of the group, and what can people expect if they join your group?
Well, it's Exceptional Learners, the Facebook group, and on there you can see my link tree to my Instagram accounts and TikTok accounts as well. The purpose of the group is that often, and I'm sure it's the same with your community as well, ADHD parents and autistic parents are very isolated and very judged. And to be able to speak and talk in a community that gets it is just so vital for your own mental health and well-being. So the idea is just to provide a place where teachers and parents can talk. Because I've always said with teachers, and the teachers are doing the best they can. So find the one that really gets your child, whether it's a food allergy or diversity, and support them. In a difficult situation where the schools don't get it at all, solve the problems for the teachers. And if you solve them, you're creating links, because it's not their fault they haven't got the information. It's not their fault they haven't had that experience, unless they've had their own child go through that. So here's my short-term memory kicking in. I'm not going to say its age. So what's he talking about?
Your Facebook group.
Oh, my Facebook group. Yeah. So we've got about 3,000 in there, and I've got about 3,000 on my Instagram account too. But I just share knowledge to try and destroy the myths and miseducation that is around, because girls actually are just as likely to have ADHD as boys, and often that's just not understood. There are 3 presentations. You can be twice exceptional, be gifted and have ADHD, and you can do that and be hyperactive, inattentive, which is a horrible name. I hate the name. Oh dear, I hate the name. And you can have a combination of both, and all be 2E as well. 2E is when you are brilliant, but you can't usually get organised to express that information or do what needs to be done. And I suppose, yeah, it's just that lack of understanding of the capabilities of our kids. So I had one child who could count in binary for fun. You know, she just loved shapes and counting. But she was in year 3, and because she couldn't finish her year 3 work, even though she had a diagnosis of being gifted, they wouldn't let her move on. Because they thought, well, she should be able to do this. And that's when you need to watch out. When somebody says, oh, you should, that means that they're comparing it to something. And more often, it's a neurotypical or aka normal, whatever, comparison. And that's when I like to point out to teachers and to parents, who are you comparing your child to? And is that truly a fair comparison? Sorry, it's not. The only fair and true comparison is your child to your child. So, we get teeth at different times. We learn to walk and speak and do all these things, wonderful things, but when our body is ready for it. It's only at school that we start comparing ourselves to a norm. We have to read level 18 by term 2 of kindergarten. What rubbish. I mean, they will learn to read, especially if they don't have the pressure. So the only true comparison, and it's easy for parents to get caught up with that because of the judgment. Or my children should be, or they could be doing this. No, give yourself credit for how far you've been. Be kind to yourself and go, okay, what's the next goal?
I love that. I think that's a good way of perhaps finishing this interview.
Sure.
Very positive reinforcement of really parental efforts, and your message as well that we should also not stop improving ourselves, that it's possible to build those new neuro channels.
Yeah, absolutely. Those new links. Oh, look, someone told me once, if you're not learning, then you're dead. You've just got to keep on learning, and learning's such fun. And if you can experience a lot of life, there'll be some things that poke out that can't continue to reoccur, and they'll be your passions. That's what you try and do. And I've been lucky enough to find a job that I'm good at, it's needed, and people pay me for, and helping kids be the best they can be. It's a fantastic job. Anyway, thank you for your time, Nina. Thank you for your great questions, although I don't think I answered them all. I think you're going to have to have me back.
We look forward to having you back for sure, and also we can invite our listeners to send some questions. immunitygroupaustralia.com.au. You can email us through the form and ask any questions for Simon, or you can follow Simon. What is your Instagram account?
That one is Simon de Roza Learning Coach, I think. But check at Facebook. Check out the Exceptional Learners Facebook, and there's an Exceptional Learners page as well. The Exceptional Learners website actually starts with an X, because I thought it was cool at the time. Anyway, live and learn. It's www.exceptionallearners, just without the E at the beginning of exceptional.
Brilliant. This was an exceptional interview. Thank you, Simon de Roza, and to our listeners, have a great day.
Sensational. Thank you.